Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for pressing play today. I don't know what kind of day you've had, but this episode is for the part of you that keeps going without being seen. If you've been trying quietly, and it feels like people slowly disappeared, this moment is for you. Not because you failed, but because you're standing in the phase most people don't talk about. The phase where effort is invisible, where results haven't arrived yet, where support becomes silent. Most people don't struggle because they're weak. They struggle because they're doing the hardest work without witnesses. And here's the truth that hurts the most. Most people don't disappear when you fail. They disappear when you haven't won yet. So pause for 1 second and comment honestly. Type A or B. A. They left when I failed. B. They left before I ever won. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might change how you see silence, loneliness, and the long road before anyone starts clapping. At the beginning of every serious journey, there is a moment that feels small, but changes everything. It's the moment you realize that the people around you don't see what you see. Not because your dream is impossible, but because it doesn't exist yet in a visible form. When you start with nothing, people don't judge your effort. They judge your position. They look at where you stand right now and assume that's where you'll always stay. So when you speak about a future that doesn't match your present, it sounds unrealistic to them. Not inspiring, not brave, just strange. This is usually when the laughter starts. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's disguised as advice. Be realistic. People like us don't do that. Focus on something safe. And the most painful part is that these words often come from people you trust. Friends, family, people who know your struggles, people who saw you at your lowest. That's what makes it hurt. If strangers doubt you, it's easy to ignore. But when people close to you question your direction, it enters your mind. You start replaying their voices when you're alone. You begin to wonder if they see something you don't, or worse, if they're right. At this stage, most people don't quit loudly. They quit quietly. They stop talking about their goals. They shrink their dreams to fit into conversations. They choose comfort over possibility, not because they want to, but because standing alone feels heavy. Here's the truth most people learn too late. Belief rarely comes before proof. The world doesn't support potential, it supports results. That doesn't make people evil, it makes them human. They trust what they can see. But this creates a dangerous gap. A gap between who you are now and who you're trying to become. And in that gap, there is no applause, no encouragement, no reassurance. Just silence. That silence feels personal, but it isn't. It's simply the price of being early. The mistake is thinking that this silence means you're wrong. It doesn't. It means you've stepped into a phase where external validation disappears and internal belief becomes your only fuel. This is where a quiet decision has to be made. Not a dramatic promise, not a speech. Just a simple choice. Will I keep going even if no one believes me yet? Because once you rely on others to see your future, you give them power over your direction. And the moment you take that power back, by choosing to move forward without permission, something shifts inside you. Nothing changes on the outside. You're still where you started, still unseen, still doubted. But internally, a line has been crossed. You stop waiting for belief. You start building evidence. And that is where real momentum begins. There's a moment early on when your dream stops sounding harmless to others. At first, people listen politely. They nod. They say things like, "That's interesting," or "Good luck." But as soon as they realize you're serious, something shifts. Your dream starts making them uncomfortable, not because it's impossible, but because it forces comparison. Your effort becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see when they look into it. You begin to notice small changes. Conversations get shorter. Questions disappear. Invitations stop coming. No one argues with you. No one openly says they don't believe in you. They just slowly step back, as if distance can protect them from your ambition. One evening, Aaron told a friend about his plan. The friend smiled, nodded, and changed the subject. The next week, they stopped replying to his messages. Nothing was said, but everything was clear. That's usually how support disappears. Quietly, without drama. This is where many people get confused. They think they did something wrong. They replay conversations in their head, searching for mistakes. But the truth is simpler and harder to accept. When you start aiming higher, not everyone can walk with you anymore. Some people are comfortable with who you used to be, the version that fit into their expectations, the version that didn't challenge their own limits. When you change direction, even silently, it disrupts that balance. So they don't fight you. They don't stop you. They just withdraw. This stage hurts because it feels personal. These aren't enemies. These are people you laughed with, struggled with, grew up with. And losing them feels like losing a part of yourself. But here's the part no one explains. This separation is not punishment. It's alignment. Not everyone is meant to follow you into the next chapter. Some people only belong to earlier versions of your life. And holding on to them out of guilt or fear only slows you down. At this point, you have two choices. You can lower your voice, soften your goals, and stay connected. Or you can accept the silence and keep moving forward alone. Choosing the second option doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest. Because if your dream requires permission to exist, it was never yours to begin with. This is the stage where you learn a hard lesson. Growth is not loud, but it is lonely. And the sooner you stop chasing understanding, the more energy you save for building. The path doesn't get easier here, but it does get clearer. And clarity is the first real form of strength. After people step back, after the noise fades, you're left with something most never face directly. Yourself. No advice, no encouragement, no audience. Just long hours and unanswered questions. This is where many stories end. Not with failure, but with hesitation. Because when no one is watching, it becomes easy to slow down. Easy to delay. Easy to tell yourself you'll start when things feel right. But real change doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with a decision made in private, not a dramatic promise, not a speech in front of others. Just a simple agreement with yourself. I will keep going, even if nothing around me changes yet. In this phase, the outside world stays the same. Your situation doesn't improve overnight. Money is still tight. Your environment still feels small. People still don't ask what you're working on. Nothing confirms that you're on the right path, but inside, something shifts. You stop waiting to be understood. You stop explaining your plans. You stop hoping for reassurance. Instead, you start building a small internal rule. I don't need permission to continue. This is when discipline quietly replaces motivation. You don't wake up inspired every day. You wake up committed. You do the work even when it feels pointless, especially when it feels pointless. The most important part of this stage is that no one can see it. And that's exactly why it works. When progress is invisible, ego has nothing to feed on. There's no praise to chase, no image to protect. You're free to focus on improvement instead of appearance. This is also where self-trust is built, not through success, but through consistency. Every time you show up without applause, you prove something to yourself. I can rely on me. That proof matters more than confidence. Confidence can disappear. Self-trust stays. Many people wait for life to give them a sign before they commit. But the sign comes after the commitment, not before it. The road doesn't open because you believe. It opens because you walk. This is the moment you stop asking, "Will this work?" and start asking, "Am I willing to do this long enough for it to work?" From the outside, you still look the same. From the inside, you're no longer negotiable. And once that line is crossed, there is no going back. The journey becomes quiet, focused, lonely at times. But for the first time, it's real. And that's when the foundation is finally set for everything that comes next. Once the decision is made, the work begins, but not in the way people imagine. There is no clean desk, no perfect setup, no inspirational environment. Just whatever space you have and the discipline to use it. This stage teaches you something uncomfortable. Growth doesn't wait for ideal conditions. You learn in corners, on the floor, in rooms that feel too small for your thoughts. You study when the house is quiet, not because it's peaceful, but because it's the only time no one needs anything from you. You work with tools that barely function: a slow phone, a weak connection, notes written and rewritten because you can't afford better resources, and none of it looks impressive. If someone walked in, they wouldn't say, "This person is building a future." They would say, "This doesn't look like much." That's the hardest part. You're doing serious work in places the world doesn't respect. You teach yourself things no one claps for. You repeat basic skills until they stop feeling basic. You make mistakes in private. You practice out loud with no one listening. You improve quietly, line by line, word by word. This phase requires humility. Because you're not learning to look smart, you're learning to be useful. And usefulness is built through repetition, not talent. There are days when it feels pointless. Days when progress is so small it's almost insulting. You wonder if you're wasting time. You wonder if real success only comes to people with better starts, better tools, better support. But something important is happening beneath the surface. While others wait for motivation, you're building endurance. While others look for shortcuts, you're building fundamentals. While others chase attention, you're building capacity. This is where most people quit. Not because it's hard, but because it's unglamorous. There's no story to tell yet, no results to show, nothing that earns respect. But this is also where real advantage is created. When you learn in uncomfortable places, you stop needing comfort to perform. You become adaptable, focused, hard to distract, harder to stop. And later, when opportunities finally appear, you don't panic. You don't freeze. You don't feel like an imposter, because you've already done the work long before anyone thought it mattered. This is the phase where skill is built without identity. And that's dangerous, because when skill meets opportunity, the world only sees the result, never the room where it started. If you're still here, don't leave yet, because this is exactly where most people walk away and miss what comes next. And if you think this kind of loneliness is rare, it isn't. People think abandonment only happens in relationships, but it happens to dreams too. There was a time when Sylvester Stallone wasn't a star. He was standing inside a pet store selling his dog, Butkus, for $25. Not because he wanted to, but because he had nothing left to eat. That's how far abandonment goes when you haven't won yet. When even keeping a dog becomes a luxury. As the work deepens, something else has to change. Not your goals, but your environment. Because progress doesn't just depend on what you do. It depends on what you allow around you. At this stage, distraction becomes more dangerous than failure. You start to notice how much energy is lost in small, unnecessary places. Conversations that go nowhere. Plans that don't move your life forward. Opinions from people who aren't building anything themselves. None of these things look harmful on their own, but together they slowly drain focus. So you begin pulling back. Quietly, you stop explaining what you're working on. You leave some messages unanswered. You skip gatherings that feel heavy instead of helpful, not because you think you're better than anyone, but because you finally understand how fragile momentum is. People notice the distance. They say things like, "You've changed. You don't have time for us anymore. You think you're too good now." What they don't see is that nothing about this feels good. It feels lonely. It feels awkward. Sometimes it feels selfish. But it's necessary. When you're trying to build something real, you can't afford to spend your best energy proving yourself to people who won't walk with you anyway. This phase is misunderstood because it doesn't look productive from the outside. It looks like withdrawal. But from the inside, it's protection. You're protecting your time, your attention, your mental clarity. And that protection allows consistency to form. Without noise, your thoughts settle. Your routines stabilize. Your effort becomes more focused. You stop reacting and start choosing. This is also when you learn an important boundary. Not everyone deserves access to your process. Some people only earn the right to see the result. Silence here isn't avoidance, it's alignment. You're not isolating yourself to escape people. You're creating space so your direction doesn't get crowded. And once your direction is clear, it becomes harder for outside voices to pull you off course. This is where your life starts to feel intentional instead of reactive. Less busy. More purposeful. And while the world may interpret your silence as arrogance or distance, what you're really doing is learning how to stay loyal to a future that doesn't exist yet, but depends on your focus today. There comes a phase where effort turns heavy, not because the work is harder than before, but because it feels unanswered. You've been consistent. You've sacrificed. You've stayed disciplined longer than most people ever do. And still, nothing changes on the outside. This is the most dangerous stage of the journey. Not the beginning, when failure is expected, but the middle, when you've invested too much to walk away, yet gained too little to feel secure. Your mind starts asking quiet questions. Is this actually working? Am I moving forward or just staying busy? What if they were right about me? One night, Aaron sat on the floor eating dry bread. His phone had no notifications, no messages, no rejections, just silence. He looked at the ceiling and whispered, "Maybe this isn't for me." Then the room went quiet again. If this part feels uncomfortable, stay. This is where the story changes direction. This is the moment nobody prepares you for. Because quitting doesn't arrive as a breakdown. It arrives as a reasonable thought. Calm, logical, almost responsible. You tell yourself it might be smarter to stop, to choose stability, to return to something familiar. And that's why so many people end here, not because they lacked ability, but because they misunderstood this phase. They believed effort should always feel rewarding. They expected progress to announce itself. When it didn't, they assumed something was wrong. But invisible effort is not wasted effort. This phase is not designed to pay you. It's designed to reshape you. This is also where jealousy tries to enter. You see others moving ahead, new jobs, new lives, visible progress, and you feel stuck, doing everything right with nothing to show. The temptation here is bitterness, but bitterness breaks focus. So instead, a different decision must be made. You stop measuring your days by outcomes. You measure them by effort. 1 hour of study, 1 application sent, 1 skill improved. Small, uncelebrated wins. Wins no one claps for, but wins that change you. At this stage, consistency becomes an identity. You don't show up because you feel strong. You show up because it's who you are now. And once that happens, quitting stops being an option. Not because success is guaranteed, but because returning to your old life feels more painful than continuing forward. This phase doesn't look powerful, but it is. Because anyone can work when progress is visible. Only a few can keep going when effort feels invisible. And those few are always closer to a breakthrough than they realize, even when the world isn't watching yet. This is the part nobody claps for. No progress, no praise, no proof. Just you, standing in the middle, deciding whether you disappear quietly or keep going when nothing is giving back. Breakthroughs rarely arrive the way people imagine. There is no celebration, no dramatic announcement, no moment where the world suddenly recognizes your effort. Most of the time, change begins quietly, almost unimpressively. After a long stretch of silence, progress shows up as something small. A message, a response, a simple yes. At first, you don't even trust it. You reread the words, not because they're complicated, but because you've been ignored for so long that attention feels unfamiliar. You wonder if it's real. You wonder if it will disappear if you respond the wrong way. So you slow down. You don't celebrate. You don't tell anyone. You just focus on doing the work properly. This first opportunity doesn't feel like success. It feels like responsibility. Suddenly, your effort has a place to land. Someone is waiting. Someone expects something from you. And that changes how you move. You prepare more carefully. You check details you used to rush past. You give the task more respect than the reward. Because deep down, you know this moment matters. Not for what it gives you, but for what it confirms. The result may be small. The reward may look insignificant to others, but to you, it carries weight. It proves something important. You're not imagining this path. You're not wasting your time. You're capable of creating value, even in small amounts. That proof settles something inside you. The doubt doesn't vanish, but it loses authority. The fear doesn't disappear, but it stops leading. This is when confidence changes form. It stops being loud or emotional. It becomes quiet and steady. The kind of confidence that comes from evidence, not hope. You don't feel finished. You feel started, and that difference matters. Because once you experience even a small win, you stop chasing random validation. You stop trying to impress everyone. You shift your attention to what actually works. You refine. You adjust. You repeat. Momentum begins here, not fast, not flashy, but real. And with momentum comes patience. You understand that progress doesn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful. It just needs to be consistent. But it will change your direction. And once your direction changes, going back becomes almost impossible. Because now you're no longer walking on belief alone. You're walking on proof. Success doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with clarity. By the time things start working, when opportunities become steady, when progress is no longer fragile, you realize something unexpected. The opinions you once feared no longer matter. Not because you've proven them wrong, but because you've outgrown the need to be understood. This is when the world slowly turns its head. People start asking questions. Messages appear from places that once went silent. Familiar names resurface with unfamiliar enthusiasm. I always knew you'd make it. I've been watching your journey. We should catch up. And in that moment, a strange calm settles in. You don't feel angry. You don't feel proud. You don't feel the urge to explain, because you finally see the pattern clearly. People didn't leave because they hated you. They left because they couldn't see results yet. And now they return, not to help, but to observe what you've become. That understanding changes everything. You stop replaying old conversations. You stop wishing things had been different. You stop needing closure. The silence that once hurt now feels neutral, almost necessary. It gave you space. It removed distraction. It forced you to grow without an audience. Winning doesn't bring people back into your life in a meaningful way. It simply shows you who was never meant to walk the full distance with you. And that's not a loss. By now, your life looks different. Not just in income or stability, but in posture, in patience, in how you respond to pressure. You move slower, but with intention. You speak less, but with certainty. You don't chase recognition anymore. You don't announce progress. You let results speak because they finally can. This is the quiet reward of walking alone long enough. Not applause, not revenge, not validation, but freedom. Freedom from needing permission. Freedom from explaining your path. Freedom from depending on belief that isn't yours. At this stage, you understand something deeply. The silence wasn't rejection. It was preparation. And now that you've crossed this point, you don't look back with resentment. You look back with understanding, because the journey didn't make you louder. It made you solid, and solid people don't need to be seen to know who they are. If you've stayed until this moment, understand this. You're not behind. You're not invisible because you're weak. You're invisible because you're early. Most people only recognize success once it's complete. They clap for the result, not the process. They admire the strength, not the years it took to build it. And that's why walking alone feels so heavy in the beginning. But now you know something important. Silence is not rejection. Loneliness is not failure. And lack of support is not a sign to stop. It's a sign that you're doing something real. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You don't need permission, approval, or applause. You only need the courage to keep showing up when no one is watching. One day, results will speak. Not loudly, but clearly. And when they do, you won't feel the need to explain your journey or prove anyone wrong. You'll simply keep moving forward, grounded in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing this truth. You walked alone long enough to become someone who doesn't need to be followed anymore.